One of our viewers requested that we do a waterfall gradation, and she says we have hundreds on my island. Can be blue skies, gray in, or fog, lots of fog. And then she goes on to describe other things in her area. They get lots of rain too. Mainly this person wants to see the concept of gradation as used with waterfalls. We did a quick tip on painting in the fog, quick tip 133 if you want to refer to that one, because we're kind of going to hinge on that for this. Again, it's all about observation. The more you observe what your subject is doing in terms of the visual language, looking for value contrast or closer value gradation, the more you observe for those kinds of things, as well as movement, how an image might be moving, such as a waterfall. The more you do that, the easier these things come to you. I'm just going to give you a couple of hints with this little quick tip to maybe kind of ease you into the idea of a waterfall where there might be fog or mist. It's all about value, more about value than anything else, and about what's happening with value. Now look at this photograph. There is fog in here. We can see it in the hills over here, and we also see some mist rising from the water itself right here. But get away from that. Get away from looking for what it is to what makes it look the way it does, because that's what you're doing as an artist. You're describing what's happening there, not waterfall. Forget that, it's going to be there. So if you look right in here, you see very close value relationship. As you get further up where there is no fog or mist or very little of it, you see a stronger value contrast. Now value can only do two things. Value can contrast, value can gradate. Just two things. And if you can make your value gradate or make your value contrast, then you can do waterfalls. So let's look at what we mean by that. Now I've got just two sets of colors here that will neutralize each other. And it doesn't matter what they are. I have here the Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red, and I also have the Gamblin Ultramarine Blue. Those two colors just happen to work very, very well when we're working with neutrals, and I'm more concerned with the value itself than I am with working with color on this one. So what do we mean? Here is value contrast. Anytime I could take any of these two values and do this, but I'm just going to take first of all, I'm going to take the darkest version. I'm going to mix this dark of these two colors and just put a stroke right here. All right, we have, in terms of paint there, we have a very dark color. Now I'm going to go over, just get some paper towel here and kind of wipe the brush out just a little bit. I'm going to go over into my lighter version of these same two colors right here. Mix those two and put this right here. Now I have value contrast. It wouldn't make that much difference in terms of value. It wouldn't make that much difference which colors they were. But we see that one is very light, one's very dark. They're side by side. They're contrasting. That is value contrasting. Now value doesn't have to be extreme like that to contrast. In fact, look at value contrast. We say here is not that extreme. So we can do any difference in value is going to be value contrasting. So there's the first thing, the practice that you can do to control contrasting value. And so here I can put a value that's much lighter than this is, and I can go to a lighter than that value right here, and you see those two are very close, but they're still contrasting. They have a close contrast. So that's one thing value can do, but value can gradate. In every image you look at, what you see in value is going to be determined by what's happening in the image and how the light's hitting it, and you're going to see either gradation or contrast. So how would we make these gradate? Simply gradually allowing that value to change. And so when I have them side by side like that, I can just take a brush that doesn't have a whole lot of paint in it, give it a slight little wisp of stroking between the two, and we have one gradually changing into the other. That is gradation. And that is what we see right here. This is gradually changing. This value is gradually changing from one value to the other. You can also have gradation between extremes. And so with these two values, I can do a similar thing. It takes a little bit more manipulating. So using a stroke like this, where you hold the brush at an angle and pull it down sort of like this, and then stroke behind it in both directions, will give you a gradation between those two values. And the more you work it, the smoother the gradation. And now what we see is the contrast has changed to a gradation, where you have a gradual change. So how does that apply here? Well, if you're doing a gradation, if you're doing a waterfall in the mist or the fog like this, that means that the work you do underneath before you ever put the waterfall in needs to have that stuff in it. And so let's just say briefly, I'll show you a little bit of a technique here that you can practice. Now, if you're just watching this 10 times, it's not going to do it for you. If you practice doing this as a technique, I think you'll see then what you might be able to do with it with any waterfall that you observe. So here we go. So let's observe what the value is doing in here. We get just a little bit here. It's not, what we're seeing in here in terms of value is not this dark, but I would go with the darkest, the shadow, what I consider the shadow areas of the value first. And I'll mix these colors so that I get this, keep this more or less in the neutral. So I'll just kind of work this back and forth between these colors right in here. Now let's see, what do we have? And you can use whatever colors you see there to do this sort of thing. But say if I was starting on this side, then I might do something like this, where I'm doing an under painting, you might call it, an under painting that is going to set the ground or set the stage for the waterfall to flow over it. And so we might do something like this, and then we'll look at what's happening right here. We have a slight value contrast right there, and so then we will go over and make that just a little bit lighter, not much, but just a little bit lighter, because we have what I call it a minor value contrast. So we have just a little bit of value contrast there that indicates the rocks. And we have the feeling this goes straight under here. You see this on this side and this side are very much in the same value family. So that would go then straight across, and where the waterfall is, you're setting a stage, so you keep it going, and that will, in my experience, help you to communicate then the whole concept of waterfall. So we have that area of value, and then you can continue to build your various value areas. Where they are contrasting, you make them contrast. We see it gets a little bit darker right here, so maybe not that much darker. Let's get that just a little bit lighter right here, and there we go, a little bit darker right here, and then we have the feeling that dark maybe kind of gradates a little bit as it's moving underneath the waterfall as it goes around. Well, you see, by observing the contrast there, the degree of contrast, and the direction in which those contrasting shapes are arranged, then you are communicating rock. It's just that simple. The value changes, and your stroking of those value changes will help you communicate the concept of rock. So so you would continue building like that. And so I will let me go just a little bit more in here. Don't want to make this too long, so just enough to show you. This is technical. It's all technical, and it's paying attention to the actual value characteristic of the colors that you're putting down. So you would continue that, and then you see as that comes down, it just gets lighter as it's coming down. Those rocks, where the mist is hitting the rocks, is gradually getting lighter. The more mist you're seeing, the lighter it gets, and this begins to kind of gradate. All right, so if I do that in this direction, sort of like this, as it's coming down, it gets lighter, and then If we don't see the contrast anymore, begin to see the gradation, we'll just do what we did right here. We simply take the brush and give it a little bit of a wisp in between those areas, and now you see it's beginning to gradate. And then as it comes down, going back to the quick tip, what is it, 133, as it comes down, it gets even lighter. The mist is getting lighter and really gradating down here like this. Then I can pull the paint out of the brush and then very gently give it that little squiggle like that and pull it, and we get gradation. So it's just technical. It's just the way you move the brush. There's nothing magical about this. It might produce what might be a magical result, but there's nothing really magical about it. And so you continue that way. Now, if the fog is really thick, you'll reach that point where it will get lighter and less distinct. There won't be very much. You won't see very much, or maybe no detail there at all, where it's just very, very light. And you can then gradually let it get lighter, gradate. This is what the person asked for, the gradation. Now, so that's as far as I'll take that part of it. And what do you do about the waterfall? The grand thing about falling water is moving so fast that our eyes really can't register all the texture that we see in those little bubbles of water. Our eyes see it as a blur, and the camera will catch it as a blur. And because the camera lenses are so that if the camera lens is set in on one speed, at high speed, it can catch the various textures in there. But the slower the speed of the camera lens, the more we're going to see that blur as that goes down. So we will mimic that movement, the movement of the water as it goes down. So we can load the brush. Now we see some value variations in here, but if you don't have your paint too thick here, thin enough, chances are you'll catch some of those variations as you make the move. So that one observation we make is we move the brush in the direction the water is falling. And the other observation that we make is that we don't repeat it over and over again, or else we're going to make it very, very stiff. And some things we just allow it to happen. And so I'm going to move in now towards the lighter color I see here. Notice I'm not going to white, but I'm going to the lighter color, and I'm going to make that. Sometimes we see those the temperature of that water. Sometimes we'll see it feeling a little bit more towards blue, and sometimes we feel it a little bit more towards a yellowish orange, but very, very light. And so I'm just going to load the brush in. And here's what I'm doing. I'm loading that brush so that the paint is very smooth. Can you see that? If I got that in the camera lens, so you can see that very smooth on the side like that. And I'm going to load it on both sides so that we have enough paint on there. Now, the other thing is, if you're working with a wide brush, you have the ability to paint in a portion of that tip. And you have the ability to turn the brush so that only a portion of that tip touches the canvas, and then you can turn that brush flatter as you move down, and it helps that stroke to become wider. And so this is what I'm going to begin doing right up here. So if I was starting right up there, I could start just with the tip, but I'm going to go relatively fast, just with the tip of that brush, and hold it and bring it down like that. And you see that gives me then that fall, the water falling. Now what we have here is the water falling very thinly. And sometimes you'll see the water falling very thinly. Now as it spreads out, we can reload the brush, and as it spreads out, we can pick up where it's spreading out and come over and allow the brush to fall like that. Now we have the water falling there as in fog. We can load the brush. Notice it was a continuous stroke. We can load the brush with more of the same value, the same thing, controlling the amount of paint that goes on the brush, and then we can come back and, whoops, I did not mean that. Just take my little finger right there. Load that again like that. And then we can come down a stroke, load again, pick up about right here, come down a stroke, load again, pick up right here, come down a stroke, load again, pick up right in here, come down a stroke, load again, and you'll reach a point where that water seems to just fade into the fog itself. Then if we want the top of that to reflect even more light, we can build another stroke on top of that. And that's called layering. If you want the technical terminology, it's called layering. And when it's also called scumbling. When we're working with in alla prima, we can actually scumble or can layer wet paint on top of wet paint and allow it to go on smoothly by the way we stroke the brush. So one more. I'm going to put white on the brush this time, and I'm going to bring it over and just tint it a little bit with that warmer color. Get enough paint on the belly of that brush so that we can make this happen. Now I'm going to hold the brush as parallel to that as I can and pull it. And you see now we have the brush gliding over will help give us that lighter area of splashing water where the light is catching it. And now we want to be careful that we don't overdo, which is a tendency of artists to overdo, but we can just allow a portion of the brush to catch that as we're coming down like that, and allow the brush to move in the direction of the water. Let's just let it do one little kind of coming out in front of the fog right there. So there's the technical one technical method that you can use for building waterfall, in fog. And go over to quick tip 133 to find out a little bit more about how I approach your seeing and interpreting fog. Put those two together, then practice the dickens out of it and have fun. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.